He was 47. He kept telling me that I was so beautiful and I wear my age so well. Just ate it up. He's also 6'4", a guy, he works for one of those number crunching magazines. And all these women kept saying, hey, do you know any good guys? And he realized, no, I don't. So we started digging into the problem. I didn't think too much about it. I'm just having fun. I'm never going to see this guy again. He was smitten. Welcome to 40 Dates in 40 Days. I'm Sarah Beth, your host. I recently turned 40 and decided to go on 40 dates in 40 days in hopes of finding my person. I'll be documenting this in close to real time and wondering right along with you, will she meet someone? So grab your cup of tea, we are going to spill it, settle in, it is time to yap. Welcome back. Thank you all for joining me. Today is the long-awaited Alaska episode. I don't actually know if anybody's been waiting for it, but I've been waiting to talk about it. So I'm really excited. As I mentioned previously, I had a great time in Alaska. I loved it. So before we get into it, of course, I've got my tea. Chose my Alaska mug. That's the souvenir I usually collect now when I go somewhere. When I was younger, I recruited for a law school, which I will talk about at some point. I had a very unusual skill, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So anyway, I would go to these college campuses to recruit and would buy a t-shirt at the schools that I really liked. So for a while, I had a Jayhawks t-shirt. I still have that, I think. Florida Gators, Texas A&M, I forget. But the campuses that I really enjoyed visiting, I'd get a t-shirt. Now I buy a mug. So this is my Alaska mug. There's a moose. I almost got killed by a moose. I don't think that's actually in my notes, so maybe I'll remember to get to that story later. But Alaska was just lovely, and I'm drinking a Twinings creamy vanilla and peppermint tea, which it used to be called Buttermint was the name of the tea flavor. So I hope you have a nice cup of tea or coffee, or you're enjoying your walk, or wherever you might be listening to this. Thank you for joining me. Before I get into Alaska, of course, I want to share a bad date story and a good date story. Our bad date story comes from my friend Drew, and I asked his permission to share his name. He is a local comedian, not just in Nashville, he travels, but Drew Davis Comedy is his handle, and I'm going to read what he said, as I tend to do anyway, because it's easier than me retelling, but also because he's a comedian, so he's a good storyteller. So he said, "Here is a bad date story for you. Well, kind of a bad date. It was honestly good till the end. We had a wonderful date. This was a second date. And at the end, I'm dropping her back off at the car, and it felt like the right moment for a first kiss. So I went in and we kissed. And immediately after the kiss, her eyes were full of tears. She said, 'I can't do this anymore,' and left my car. And that's how the date ended. When something like that happens, it really makes you wonder about your kissing skills. So the next day or so, I did reach out and ask what happened. Is she okay, etc.? And she finally got back to me with an explanation. Apparently, I was her first date after a divorce and also her first kiss after her divorce. And in the moment of kissing me, she realized she still had feelings for her ex." He goes on, "And I wish that was the end of the story, but I am ordained and a former pastor," which she knew. And months later, she reached out to me again because she and her ex were getting back together, and she asked if I could perform the ceremony. I asked her the date, and I was so sorry, but I had a scheduling conflict. I didn't even look at my calendar. Now, I have been somebody's first date and first kiss after a divorce, which I'm going to share in a moment. So I can relate on that part, but he did not ask me to perform his wedding ceremony. Just the audacity was mind-blowing to me. And I hope you had a chance to listen to last week's episode with Jake, where we talked about the male experience of dating. But some of the stories that men tell me about how women have treated them and what has happened on their dates is truly mind-blowing. So just know, guys out there, you do have my sympathy. I think women have it slightly harder. But you have my sympathy. So thank you, Drew, for sharing that story, which leads me to the good date story of this week, which actually I have one or two that you guys have submitted, but this is one of my own because it's relevant both to what Drew was talking about and to my trip to Alaska. And that is a guy I met in Wyoming. I will talk more in just a minute about my road trip in 2021. I lived in DC at the time, went down to Texas and up through what's up through New Mexico and then Colorado and Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, and then back to DC. It was amazing. Amazing. In Wyoming, I got there the day they lifted the mask mandate in Wyoming, and let me tell you, I've never felt so free in my life. I didn't realize how much having a mask on my face made me feel like, I don't know how I felt, but taking it off, I felt free. So anyway, I really enjoyed Wyoming. At this point, I was in Laramie, and that's where the university is. It's a real cute little town. Highly recommend if you are ever out that way. So I went out one night. I went to a brewery. I just sat at a bar. This was kind of my thing on the road trip. I was keeping a journal. This was 6.5 weeks that I was on the road, so I didn't want to forget anything. So I'd keep a journal, and that was kind of my routine at night. In a new city, I'd go to a brewery. Breweries are generally safe. They're generally friendly, easy to talk to people or not. So I'd go to a brewery and get out my journal and update for the last day or two with my notes. Well, I did that the first night I was in Laramie. Second night, I went to a different brewery and was sitting there doing the same thing. And small town, Wyoming, I mean, it's a big town for Wyoming, but it's a small town. A guy was at that brewery that had seen me the night before at the other one. So he came over and he said, "Hey, I saw you. I recognized you writing in the book. I saw you last night at such and such place." And so we just started talking, and he says, "Well, do you want me to show you around?" I said, "Okay." This happened to be St. Patrick's Day. We went to one or two more places and just the hot spots of Laramie, and went to, an authentic Old West bar where you can see the bullet holes, which is, I learned, pretty common in Wyoming and Montana. But we had a great time, and we did kiss at the end. It just sort of was the natural progression of the evening. I didn't think too much about it. I'm just having fun. I'm never going to see this guy again. He was smitten. Smitten. And he begged me to see him the next day. I was leaving, and so we ended up meeting for breakfast, and he wrote me a note. And he said, "Don't read it until you get to South Dakota." That was the next state I was going to. I said, "Okay." So I don't remember if I honored that or not. I probably did. Either way, I read the note when he wasn't there, and he'd given me a couple little Wyoming pins. Really nice guy. I was very flattered, but also very suffocated. It was way too much too quickly, and I could pick up on the fact that part of why it was way too much too quickly is he'd been married for a long time, was divorced. I'm new in town. I'm very different from most Wyoming people. And I think he just really got caught up in the romance of it and the excitement and the freshness post-divorce. So the irony of this whole story is that he was giving me recommendations for other spots along my trip, and which really was how I structured my trip. I had a very loose itinerary so that I could get recommendations from locals. And he told me about a bar in Montana that I had to go to, and was not on my radar. Never would have gone to this place had Wyoming guy not recommended it. But I did go. Another old Western bar with bullet holes in it. Great bar. Ended up, the owner was working that night, met him, and he and I dated off and on for 2 years. So, sorry, Wyoming guy, you kind of shot yourself in the foot there. But it was a really good day. Very fond memories of our evening gallivanting around Laramie, and it was really sweet, even though we did not ultimately end up going anywhere. I mentioned previously that I want to start highlighting good relationships because I feel that there is this very pervasive narrative, for lack of a better word, that no one's really happy in relationships. You either get married and get divorced because the divorce rate is 50%. I don't know if that's still true, but that's the still cited statistic. Or you get married, but you're actually miserable. and just get really tired of this narrative, because if that is the case, then why on earth are we all trying so hard to find someone? Why do we do this? Why do we put ourselves through this? And so I am asking you to send in good relationship stories. I asked this on my Facebook, and it didn't go quite the way I anticipated, which I should have expected. It's Facebook. There were a couple of really sweet comments. There were a couple of people that I know personally are relationship goals. And then there were a couple of people that are like, yeah, my husband and I are really happy. And it wasn't super compelling. I'm not saying that they're not. I hope they are. But I think it's really easy on social media to portray that you were really happy. I'm saying all that to say, when I'm asking for these good relationship stories, please feel free to send in yours personally if that is the case. But give me a little bit more to convince me that you are actually happy. Another thing people tend to make jokes about on Facebook is, I think I've seen Trey Kennedy make a joke about this. Someone of that ilk. People get on Facebook and make this anniversary post and they're like, it's so hard being married. I really hate everything about you, but we stick it out and we're the better for it. So that's how some of these can sound to the slightly jaded listener. I'm not really jaded, but I think there are a lot of people out there who are jaded. I am jaded about how people represent themselves on social media. We'll say it that way. Not jaded about relationships. I'm jaded about how people present relationships on social media. That's a little bit of a soapbox for me just to say, please send in your good relationship stories that you're comfortable with me sharing on the podcast, whether it's you or a parent or a friend or a sibling, whatever. Just give me a little substance when you do. Otherwise, I will just say, good for you. I did get one already though, and it's really sweet and I want to share it with you. I'm trying to think how I can describe who this person is without giving too much information. This is someone I've known since college, but in a professional way. So we've been Facebook friends. I graduated from college a million years ago. So we've been Facebook friends, and he has followed my podcasting journey and been super supportive and encouraging, and I really appreciate it. So shout out to you, because I know you'll listen to this episode. But he sent in his own, and he did give me convincing information. So I asked him if I could share it, and he said yes. So again, I will read it. Since you asked for happily married stories, here's ours as succinctly as I can make it. We met 28 years ago. She just graduated from college, and I was working as an RD at a dorm at that college and was in my second year of teaching English. My students asked me to coach their dorm wars team. That's probably at every college, but the dorms would compete against each other in silly games like riding in a grocery cart or whatever. My students asked me to coach their dorm wars team, so I had to meet with their RD to coordinate, and boom, we dated for 6 months and I proposed, and in another 6 months we were married. Been 27 wonderful years and 3 kids later. Year 1 was rough because we both thought we could change each other to fit our preferences. Plus, 2 vastly different cultures joining together. I'm a Southern Tennessee boy, a white boy, and she is an Indian immigrant from South Africa, growing up under apartheid, where whites were an oppressive enemy in her experience, never dreaming she would marry a white guy. First of all, I just want to pause there and recognize that that is a really difficult thing to work through and overcome, just these big picture cultural differences. Not only the difference of family background, which everybody has bringing in, but major pervasive cultural differences. So kudos to you guys for even making it to the altar and then making it work. But by year 2 or 3, we gradually learned to accept and love each other regardless, quirks and peeves and all. By year 10, we realized that we had both indeed changed somewhat to fit more closely each other's preferences and to avoid each other's peeves. By year 20, we had significantly adapted or changed to please one another, and the conflict frequency had decreased almost yearly for our entire marriage. So change is possible, but it's more like a glacier melting. It takes time, but it's perceptible and meaningful. Just be patient with one another. We both had a strong sense of making marriage work, no matter if we feel happy in the moment. Love is a choice, not a feeling, And that's what has worked. Together, we're happier than ever as friends and as romantic partners, but we're still learning every day how to do better in our marriage. Here's why I love that story so much. The longevity is great. Congratulations. I love that. But I love the very realistic. We changed, we evolved. It was slow, it was over time. And yet, the very hopeful, we changed, we evolved, we became a better partner over time. I think so often, like I was saying earlier with the joke, people are like, marriage is really tough, marriage is really hard, but we've made it. His was more, yeah, it was hard, but we continued to grow and every year got better and improved and put the work in and believed in each other. And I just think it's a beautiful, realistic story of what marriage can be. So thank you so much for sharing that story. I really appreciate it. So again, if any of you have good relationship stories, please send them in. Before I dive into my recap of Alaska, I want to talk a little bit about the mathematics of dating, which seems unrelated, but let me explain. So my road trip also seems unrelated, but it's not. The reason I went on this 6.5-week road trip in 2021 in the middle of COVID was because I was living in DC at the time, which I hated, but that is a different topic. And there was a guy there that I had been infatuated with for years, but we'd never lived in the same spot. And now suddenly we both live in DC, and I thought he was the one. I thought for sure that at some point it was going to all work out. Things were going to fall into place and we were going to end up together. I truly thought that. Well, spoiler alert, that did not happen. In fact, he got engaged to someone else and I was devastated, just absolutely devastated. So I was talking to one of my friends and he said, maybe DC is not the right place for you. You need to go somewhere where there are more men than women. And I was like, where? South Dakota? I just laughed it off. But then I started thinking about it and I thought, well, why don't I go to the Dakotas? At that point, I wanted to go to all 50 states, still do. Alaska was 47, so I got 3 left, but I wanted to go to all 50 states. I thought, when else am I going to get to the Dakotas? This is COVID. I'm working remotely. I didn't have a taxing job and I had a great boss. I thought, well, I have the flexibility to do this. When else will I be able to do this? Just for fun. Forget about meeting a man, just to do it. So I started planning this trip and I really wanted it to be pretty loosely planned, which is not my personality, but I wanted there to be freedom to go to a Hallmark town that I'd never heard of if somebody recommended it. And I was going in February and March in my Honda Civic. So I knew the weather could be a factor for sure. And I just wanted to be able to come and go as I pleased. It was amazing. Loved every minute of it. Of those 6.5 weeks, I spent about 2 weeks with friends, cumulatively 2 weeks scattered throughout. While I'm preparing for the trip, someone surely must have recommended this book to me, but it's called Datanomics. I finally looked up who wrote Make Your Move, that book that I've referenced several times. It's the same author as Datanomics. Make Your Move was his answer to what he discovered in his first book. So this author is a guy, he works for Fortune or Money, one of those number crunching magazines, and lived in New York City. And all these women kept saying, hey, do you know any good guys? And he realized, no, I don't. Why do I know so many great women and no men to set them up with? So he just started digging into the problem. No relationship background at all, just looking at the data. And his conclusion for this whole book is that most college educated people want to be with someone else who is college educated. If that is the case and you are a woman, there are genuinely not enough men to go around because of the gender imbalance in education. And so he dug further into that and realized that in the cities, especially along the coast, the imbalance is even greater because college-educated people tend to flock to cities. So you're getting all of these college-educated people from all over the country, and the statistics are just not in women's favor. They so greatly outnumber men. He then looked deeper into that and discovered that in universities where the women greatly outnumbered the men, there was a big hookup culture. He looked at, I don't know, Bryn Mawr, Sarah Lawrence, or some of those schools where there were way more women than men. There was a big hookup culture, where the reverse was true at, say, engineering schools. I think he looked at Georgia Tech, where there were a lot more men than women. Everybody was coupled up. And his conclusion from that was that in places where the women greatly outnumber the men, there is less incentive for men to choose a partner and settle down. Of course, this is generalization, but this is just what the numbers were showing him. And so then he writes this book and he's like, well, here's the problem. There is an actual problem. If you've been thinking there was, you are correct. And then women said, okay, well, what's the solution? He said, I don't know. I'm a numbers guy. I don't know. So he started researching out of that. Make Your Move was written, and he talked about women making the first move and so forth. But he also talked about going where there are more men than women, and that might require moving, which is something, I don't know if she said it on the podcast or if she just said it to me in one of our conversations, but Lindsay Taylor, the dating coach, she said, well, she did say her husband was not in Nashville. She had to look elsewhere. And I don't know that necessarily uprooting your life to find love is the answer, but I think it's worth considering, is the location where I currently am best suited to me finding somebody who's the right fit for me, whether because of gender imbalance or for other reasons. I'll give a quick story that I'm going to talk about more in another episode, but to Alaska, I flew through San Francisco, and so Bumble told everyone in San Francisco I was there, and so a lot of my matches for a while were from California. Good Lord. I am so grateful that I do not live in California, that the Bay Area is not my pool, but I could see it being a great pool because there are more men than women. So if you're into nerdy techie guys who brag about their money, I could see it being a great pool for you. He also, in Make Your Move, suggested not making a college degree criteria. It is not a deal breaker for me. I have a master's degree. I do prefer somebody who has been through higher education, but it is not a deal breaker. In fact, my half-sister, my sister, Melissa, I think she has her master's as well, and her husband does not, and they are a model marriage. I love them. I may have her on the podcast sometime to talk about a successful marriage. So it's definitely doable. I definitely think you can be intellectually compatible with somebody who does not have the same degrees as you. I do think it's a little more challenging to find somebody that it has the same life experiences and all of that when education is so divided. But that was one of the things he suggested. But his what I really want to talk about is his idea of going where the statistics are in your favor if you're a man or a woman. So for me, Alaska is in my favor. I'm going to break down some of those numbers. Before I do, though, I also want to talk about this TED Talk that I watched years ago, and I've referred to it so many times. It's by Amy Webb. She gamed the system when it came to dating. She's a data nerd. She's written a book. I'm on hold for it at the library, so I will report back on that later. But she is Jewish in Philadelphia. And so she broke down all the data of how many eligible men there were in Philadelphia. She started with, 50% male, and then however many were in her age bracket, and then how many were Jewish. That was important to her, and that, of course, significantly reduced the population. Then she assigned some sort of value. I don't know how she did it, but some sort of value to, will I think they're attractive? Will we get along? And when she crunched all those numbers, she said in the whole city of Philadelphia, there were 36 men with whom she was compatible. which still, you only need 1 out of 36, but what are the odds of running into those 36? I'm going to get into more of what she talks about and how the 36 ended up not really mattering, but I was so intrigued by this in DC. I did it something similar and plugged in my criteria, but I only did my very basic criteria. And when I did all that, and I only did it in DC proper, I didn't do DC Metro. I used census statistics. And so when I did all that, I narrowed it down to there were out of 700,000 men in DC, there were 1,000 who met my basic criteria. Now, I did not do what she did, which was assign something about compatibility and attractiveness, because I didn't know how to do that. Hers, I think she assumed she'd be attracted to 10%. So if we use her number out of 1,000, then there's only 100. And then the ones that I would actually like is much smaller. But even if it's 1,000, in a city of 700,000, how do I find those 1,000? They're not all in a room together. How do our paths cross? And that is the bigger question, and maybe really the bigger question that my 40 dates in 40 days is trying to answer. But what Amy went on to talk about that was a little bit more hopeful, and I think aligns well with what Lindsay Taylor had said. She ended up she wrote out all the things that were important to her. And she said she had pages and pages and pages. She assigned a numeric criteria to each one of those things, which something that was more important, being Jewish, for example, might have a much higher numeric value than something like likes the same Chinese restaurant as I do, or whatever. That was not an example she gave. That's my example. So then every potential date, she was using the dating apps and all that. Every potential date, she would count up their criteria, and it had to meet a minimum threshold for her to even go on the date. And that's similar to what Lindsay said of qualifying matches. So I really liked that. That is how she ended up meeting her husband. She did get married. It's a nice happy ending with a bow on it, but she met him because they matched. He had enough criteria. He met the threshold. They went out after the date. She recalculated and he was well above the threshold. She really liked him. And so then they continued to see each other and got engaged and married and lived happily ever after. So I like this idea of incorporating math and just being really intentional about dating. We don't have to take it as far as Amy and I did of calculating there's only 1,000 men or 100 men or 36 men with whom we are compatible. But I do like the idea of being very intentional, treating it seriously. She did say she started out with her grandma said it'll happen when you least expect it. And she's like, I was just trying to least expect my way to somebody and that wasn't working either. So putting effort into it. And of course, there's still, whether it's God or fate or serendipity or the cosmos or life, there are still these factors that cannot be mathematically accounted for. And let's set ourselves up to be as successful as possible by applying some of these practical tools and analysis to something that is so important. I like it. But let's get into some of these numbers, okay? So one of you sent me a Reddit where people were saying, Nashville, there's 8 women to every 1 man. I knew that was not true. There is absolutely no way that is true. Maybe in the bars on Broadway, because they're all bachelorette parties, and girls travel in bigger packs than men. But in real life, that's not true. So I looked it up according to the census. This was from, I don't know, a couple of years ago. Let me preface all this by saying I'm not good at math, so some of these numbers might be skewed. I did the best I could. The point will be accurate, just not sure if the numbers will be. But according to the census, there's 51.5 women for every 48.5 men. On the surface, that looks pretty close to 50-50. And this is one thing that in Daytonomics he addressed, like, it doesn't look that bad until you start looking at it in the aggregate. And you're like, this is a big imbalance. So 51.5 to 48.5, that's a difference of 3 people out of 100. Okay. So in a city of 700,000, like Nashville, again, not metro area, just Nashville proper, city of 700,000, that means there are 21,000 more women than men. Certainly not 8-1, but a significant difference, a statistically significant difference, I think is how the professionals would say it. And I also don't know how that breaks down if within the 20s to 40s age group, there is more of a gender imbalance. I don't know. I didn't dig into that. But for the sake of discussion, there are 21,000 more women than men in the city of Nashville. I saw a state ranking. Nashville is the 39th lowest number of men for the whole state. I'm sorry, Tennessee. For the whole state, Tennessee ranks 39th for number of men. That means there are 38 states that have more men than us, proportionately. Alaska. 730,000 people in the whole state. The whole state of Alaska has approximately the same population as the city of Nashville. Alaska is the number one highest number of men for states. Tennessee's 39, Alaska's 1, most men. There are 110 men per women. Now, also, let me say that I'm getting these statistics from places like wisevoter.com. And I'm not sure how accurate they are. I tried to get actual census statistics when I could, but I couldn't always. So even take the numbers with a grain of salt. But again, for the sake of discussion, 110 men for every 100 women, which for a population of 730,000 is 73,000 more men. So Alaska has more than 3 times an excess of men than Nashville does of women. I don't know if that's a way that makes sense to explain it, but the point is Alaska has 73,000 more men than women. Nashville has 21,000 more women than men for approximately the same size population. I just think that's interesting. And I think that really explains why I had such an amazing time in Alaska. One thing that I observed, and I think this is related to the ratios. In Alaska, it seemed that the men were evaluating with different criteria. I saw several men with women who I did not think were as attractive as the man was, which is always an unusual phenomenon to me. Because men are so visual, stereotypically in culture, men tend to try to find the most beautiful woman they can. So I note it when I see a man who is noticeably more attractive than his partner. Some of these men are fishing boat captains, so they're on the water all the time. You need a partner who is willing to put up with that. You also need a partner if you're living in Fairbanks, Alaska, who can handle -40 temperatures routinely in the winter. If you're living even further north in Alaska, you need a woman who can handle, I don't know, whatever crazy things they do up there, because it's wild and my brain can't comprehend it. Somebody told me that when she lived in Fairbanks, she didn't have running water. And she said that was fairly common because unless you were fairly well off, you couldn't afford to keep your pipes warm enough to not freeze in the winter. And I was like, this is the 2000s. This is not the 1800s. My mind was blown. So the things that are most important to you change based on where you live and your lifestyle factors and all of that. And this is very anecdotal. This is very surface level observations. But I did observe the men in Alaska seem to be prioritizing different things in looking for a partner than they do perhaps in the big cities where there are plenty of people to choose from and where lifestyle factors are easier. I did want to highlight one thing from the apps this week was I'm now acutely aware. For better or worse, this process has made me so aware of when men do or do not ask questions. And I'm just running out of patience for it. So I matched with this guy on the apps and it was a really dull conversation. But I told him I was in Alaska. It was a Nashville guy, but I was in Alaska. He asked me no questions about Alaska. No, wow, that's amazing. Why are you there? Where are you? What are you doing? This is such an easy thing to ask a question about, and he asked 0. And then he followed up with, what are you looking for on this app? Which, as we've already talked about, is a kiss of death because it shows me exactly what they're looking for. So at that point, I just unmatched him. It may have been rude to just not even respond, but the back-to-back, the double whammy of not asking me any questions when I'm throwing you a softball. And what are you looking for? Especially after these Alaska men that I had just enjoyed so much talking to. I was like, I do not have the time for you. Goodbye. My brother texted me recently. He was watching the Anna Delvey, whatever the name of her fictionalized show was that was popular a year or two ago on Netflix. And he asked me if I had watched it, and I said yes. And I use that reaction gif all the time. I do not have time for this, and I do not have time for you. And that's how it was with that gentleman. I did see some glaciers while I was in Alaska. I'm not going to talk too much about the landscape. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. After a while, I was like, okay, I get it. The mountains are pretty. I'm tired of hiking. I was there maybe a couple days too long. I did see some glaciers. So the earlier analogy about changing throughout the course of your marriage at glacial speed was appropriate. I also wore this sweatshirt. I think this is the way you show skin in Alaska, is you wear a one-sleeved sweatshirt. I was cold, honestly. It was chilly while I was there. Even for Alaska, they said it was a little chillier than usual. But it did get me, it accomplished its objective. It was a conversation piece. So let's dive in. Day 1, I wear this. I go to breakfast. There was a breakfast bar, and it was a very crowded restaurant. Shout out to one of my tip jar followers, sent me a ton of recommendations for Alaska, where to go, what to do, and it was so helpful. So I was just hovering by the bar, and this guy was getting up to leave, and he was an attractive, probably in his 50s, but early 50s, attractive man. And I saw he was starting to get up, and I said, I'm just going to hover awkwardly close to you until you get up so I can take your seat. And he said, you can just tell me to move. And I was like, no. Finish. I'm not trying to rush you. I'm just letting you know that I'm going to move in as soon as you do. And he got up, and I sat down, and whatever, he goes to the bathroom, I guess. And when he came back, y'all, he just like put his hand on my shoulder, like this bear one. He put his hand on my shoulder and he said, enjoy your breakfast. And I don't know why it wasn't creepy, probably because he was attractive, but it wasn't creepy. It was warm and manly, and I loved it so much. I was like, all right, Alaska, my first meal here. You are setting the bar. I love it. So then I go about my day. I actually talked to an older gentleman. He was 81, I think. He rides his bike along the path where I was walking, and he came up and asked me if I was cold. He teased me about it. But that's just what he does. He rides his bike and he talks to tourists, and he told me he's lived in Alaska since he was 20. He served in the military. Of course, I found out this is part of the reason everyone in Alaska loved me, because 1 out of 8 Alaskans are active or retired military. And we've discussed before how the military and I have a unique bond. So he had served in the military, not in Vietnam. He was stationed, I think he said, in France. Just a really pleasant conversation, told me some Alaska information. I said, I really appreciate you coming to talk to me. And he said, well, I like to do this with the tourists. I said, well, I think most people would really enjoy it. He said they usually do. There's 2 or 3 every year that are like, why are you talking to me? I said, are they New Yorkers? He said, yeah, of course. The people from the Northeast would be like, who is this person? Why are they talking to me? Which I say with all love to my New Englanders. It's just a different culture. Also, I recognize New York is not New England. So to my Northeasterners, I say that with love. At lunch, I went to a brewery and was just talking to the bartender, talking to the guys sitting next to me. Nothing flirtatious at all, just a nice conversation. The guys next to me got up and left before I did. I go to pay my bill. One of them had paid it. And this was a $40 meal. This was not cheap. Also wasn't very good. Alaska, I had a few good meals. Not a foodie place, let me tell you. But it was so sweet that this man who I had talked to, but not in any flirtatious way, not in any way that would make him feel like he needed to pay or anything like that, and not in a way that I couldn't even thank him. He'd already left. I just thought that was so nice. Honestly, a little strange. I don't know why he did it, but so kind. So then I go about the rest of my day and to have an Uber driver who's a bit older, probably in his 60s, and he could not stop saying that he can't believe that I wasn't married and how pretty I was, blah, 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 blah. It was sweet, but he said it a few too many times that it started getting creepy. I think he was harmless, I really do, but it did make me feel a little uncomfortable. One time is fine. He said it many times. But he told me that his friends had gone to Nashville last year and commented on how many beautiful women there were in Nashville, which I heard it at least one or two other times. And I said, yes, that is true. And as we've statistically proven, there are more of them than men. So I said, yeah, I gotta stay competitive. So it was nice. Like I said, a little bit too much, but still I appreciated it. And it just continued the theme of this beautiful first day in Alaska. Day 2, I headed down to Seward. Let me tell you, I took every form of transportation that was possible in Alaska. 0 out of 10 recommend doing what I did. Just rent a car and do the whole thing. I made it difficult on myself because I really wanted to take the train, and it was beautiful, but the car ride is also beautiful, and it would have saved me a lot of time and money and angst had I just done that. Nevertheless, I get down to Seward. I go to a bar for lunch. I'm sitting next to a guy that runs a sled dog company. And then I'm sitting on the other side by guys that do lights for the shows on the cruise ship. So again, we're not flirting. Nothing's going to come of this conversation. Just really nice to sit at a bar and talk to people and talk to men. I do think it's easier to talk to people when you're traveling. There's just a natural conversation starter. That night I went to dinner, talked to the people sitting next to me. Again, they had a cute story. She was from England, but was really big into snowboarding, I think. Some outdoor activity. And so she'd come over here with her then partner and met this guy, and they stayed in touch and stayed friends, whatever. She and the first guy separate. Years later, she connects with the Alaska guy and they get together. They've been together for years. I can't remember how many. They went on this big road trip, months-long road trip across the whole US, and they just have fun. So they were hanging out at this bar with his dad. And so I talked to them and that was fun. Then I went to another bar, but I ran into a girl that I talked to on the train. And so she just wanted to chat, which was fine. I was tired anyway, so I didn't need to find anybody to flirt with. So talked to her, then went back to my Airbnb. Day 3, I did rent a car and I went over to Homer, which is a fishing town on the opposite side of the same body of water. I'm so bad at geography. Opposite side of the same inlet, I guess. But it does take a while to drive there. I think there is one highway in Alaska, Highway 1. I'm pretty sure that's accurate. So I go over to Homer and I go to this bar there. It's called the Salty Dog. Famous. I don't think it's the same Salty Dog as the ones that are in a lot of beach towns in the US, or in the lower 48. I think it's its own thing. Regardless, it's one of these dollar bills all over the ceilings and walls and cash only, just that kind of fishing village bar. And there were a lot of tourists and locals there. So that's where I ended up talking to the ship captain. Spent about 30 minutes talking to him before he mentioned that a girl was coming to meet him. I said, oh, okay. He was 27, but he was really interesting to talk to, even if there was no flirtation, and he was cute. So I liked talking to him, then ended up talking to a couple other guys. One is, I think, 28, but the other one was 33, and he really wanted to meet up for a drink. I was leaving. He was going to drop his buddy off. He said, meet me somewhere else for a drink. And I wasn't going to, but because of the podcast, I said, okay. I will. I can be out late one night. It won't kill me. So I said I'd meet him for one drink. I get there well before he did. And so I'm sitting at the bar and I knew I was sitting next to a guy, but I hadn't looked at him. I was waiting for the other guy to come. Eventually he starts talking to me and I look at him. He is quite attractive. And so we just start talking, and he said, I've been trying to talk to you. And I said, well, I didn't know. He said, you were just on your phone. Well, I'm waiting for somebody. So he and I are talking. The first guy, salty dog guy, gets there. He's got 2 girls with him. I sort of thought these girls were there together with him. I still don't know, honestly. It doesn't matter, except it was a little weird that he showed up with girls when he's there to get a drink with me. Well, the guy on my other side, he and I are finishing up our conversation, but I introduced them. I'm trying to get out of this conversation, get into this one, but every time I look over at the salty dog guy, he's talking to these girls. And so I just keep talking to him. Anyway, finally, he said, we're going to go outside. It's kind of noisy in here. And I said, well, it's cold outside. He said, well, we're from here. I said, I'm not going outside. And he said, okay, well, this is an old friend of mine, so we're just going to catch up. I'll be back in a little bit. Okay, well, have fun. So he goes outside with those girls he came with, and I just kept talking to the other guy, who was much cuter anyway. And then we exchanged numbers, and we got coffee the next day, and he still texts me. So good return on my investment of time. When I left, I don't know if the first guy, the salty dog guy, even knew I left. I have no idea. We never spoke again. So maybe one of those girls was the love of his life. I don't know. Regardless, I was glad I spent my time talking to the other guy. He was 47. He kept telling me that I was so beautiful and I wear my age so well. Just ate it up. He's also 6'4". I have this theory that I don't think is supported, but I have this theory that the further west you go, the taller people get. He is originally from Montana, went to school in Wyoming, University of Wyoming in Laramie, as we've talked about earlier in this podcast, and then ended up in Alaska. He's not going to leave Alaska. He's a man in the mountains, Montana, Wyoming, and Alaska. His whole family's up there. He's not leaving. But he was really fun to talk to, and he continues to text me. The next day, I headed up the road to Soldotna, Alaska, which is garbage. Never go there. 0 out of 10 recommend Soldotna. The next day, went back to Anchorage, did have my favorite meal, Moose Tooth Brewery. They had the best beer I had on the whole trip, and they had really good pizza. Talked to the guy sitting next to me, not romantic, but his girlfriend was a waitress there. But again, just really nice to sit at a bar and talk to people. And then I headed up to this really cute little town, a little north of Anchorage called Palmer. And I went to a brewery there and was asking the waitress, like, where can I go after this? It was a Monday night. I was like, is anybody going to be out? And she said, it's industry night, so there might be. So she told me a couple, like, the historic divey bars. I don't usually go to divey bars by myself in Nashville, but traveling Sarah Beth is a different woman. So I went, and it was kind of dead, but there was one guy, and actually, I get scared sometimes. So I saw this guy that seemed like, I didn't fully take him in. I didn't really know what he looked like, but he seemed about age appropriate. Might be somebody I'd want to talk to. But it was either sit like right next to him or sit at the opposite end where there was more space and I felt a little less intimidated. So I chose that. Some other man comes up and ends up buying us all some Alaska shot. It was called a duck fart. I don't remember. It was good. It was like Kahlua and something. So he and I talked for a little while. Then I go to the bathroom. I come back and this guy on the end starts talking to me and he was so cute. He was very charming and he, like everybody else in Alaska, is a pilot. Actually, he was finishing his pilot's license, but he has since gotten it. He was 6'1". He and I talked for the rest of the night. We stayed out quite late enough that the sun was still up because I don't know if it ever set while I was there. I was not up late enough to see it set, but I don't know if it did or not. Anyway, he and I got along really, really well. And then again, the next day, we went out and got lunch and it was good and he was easy to talk to. And so both he and the Homer guy, I saw a second time, would have seen a third time, but I don't live in Alaska. And this guy also cannot leave Alaska. He's from there. He's from Fairbanks, and he has 4 children. And Lord, I don't want to move to Alaska, but if I did, I'm definitely not moving to Fairbanks. I could do maybe Anchorage, maybe, but not Fairbanks. But we had a great time. We've texted a couple times since then, not like the other guy that texts me almost every day. But either way, it was great to meet him. I really enjoyed talking to him and just, again, having this good-looking man that I like spending time with to talk to. Next day, I go up to Talkeetna, which is this little hippie village, and I go to the bar in town. I think there's only one. And it's, again, a mixture of tourists and locals in the summer, a lot of tourists, of course. And there was a super drunk guy that would not stop talking to me. He wasn't super inappropriate, except that he was so drunk, and that was inappropriate, and I did not want to talk to him, so I had to leave the bar to get away from him. I mean, I couldn't physically sit at the bar. I had to go somewhere else. Then he left, so they all invited me back. You can join us. I had joked to one of them while this drunk guy was in the bathroom. I was like, I'm in exile over here. I can't come back to the bar. So I came back and ended up talking to a true local, and he was very nice and told me I was very pretty, which I appreciated. The other guy, though, I really would have rather talked to. He was more age appropriate, and he was not a true local. He spent a lot of time there. He also was an attorney. And so I just think that might have been a more productive conversation for me. But either way, it was nice. I enjoyed talking to Craig, was his name, sitting next to me, and just had a fun night. Okay, next day, I go up to Denali, I think is how most people say it up there. I've always said Denali. Regardless. Do almost get killed by a moose on the way back outside of the park, but I'm driving on the highway. I'm going 60 or 70. It's a massive animal bounds onto the highway, just like jumped over a bridge. Is suddenly on the highway. I have to slam on my brakes, swerve to not hit him, but then it's raining, so I start hydroplaning. I was so terrified. And there's a car coming from the other direction. Fortunately, it's Alaska, so there weren't many cars, just one car, and it was far enough away that he had plenty of time to stop and not hit me or the moose. But it was so scary. But also, this moose was massive and majestic, and I really wanted to take a picture of it, but I was so happy to be alive. I just kept driving. So I stopped at a restaurant that I don't remember the name of now, but it was so good. I really liked it. And my waitress was from Mississippi. I think she must be a teacher or something, because she said she and her husband come up in the summer. And so this is her summer job. And I loved that. I was like, maybe next summer, if I still haven't met someone, maybe next summer I'll just go waitress in Alaska and see what happens, and hopefully bring him back here, because I just don't want to move to Alaska. So then day 8, my last day, I had hoped to see the Palmer guy, the pilot with 4 children. I'd hoped to see him again because he was in Anchorage also. And I was flying out of Anchorage, but our timing just didn't line up, so that didn't happen. I get to the airport. I'm sitting at the airport bar. I have TSA pre-check, by the way. That is a new thing for me, and it is amazing. Everyone has to get it. I got through security so fast, sit at the bar. I am holding court at this bar. It's almost all men sitting around the bar. The bartender starts it all off. He just starts talking to me, airport bars, everybody's talking about where you're going, whatever. And he said, in front of all these men, he said, "Did everyone try to scoop you up while you were here?" I said, "Well, a few tried, yeah." And he said, "There are lots of lonely men in Alaska. I'm not even lonely, and I would try to scoop you up." And I was like, "Well, thank you, sir. That's very nice." So he's saying that in front of all these other men. So this guy starts talking to me on my left, and he is drunk as a skunk. Nice guy. One observation I have about Alaska men is they're very family oriented. So this guy, drunk out of his mind, would not be someone that you would think would talk about how amazing children are. But he did. His son is, I think, 18, he was flying down to see him for graduation. And he just talked about how wonderful kids are. And then this married guy on the other side of me is also talking to me, added me on Facebook. That's weird. I made fun of him because I said, that's a very boomer thing to do. But he's married and he's telling me that I'm mom material. I think I was talking about my neighbor kids and how cute they are. And he says I'm mom material, which I'm like, well, you're married, so who cares? But they're just evaluating, again, maybe back to that different criteria. Family is so much a part of culture up there that they're evaluating me, whether I make a good mom or not. We're just talking at a bar. Also, the guy with 4 kids. I mean, you would think with 4 children that he likes them, but he just said kids are amazing. And people up there could not get over the fact that I was A, not married, and B, did not have children. Like, their brains could not compute this. I said, I mean, it's a little abnormal at 40 to have not been married and not have kids, but it's not that weird. This is common in the lower 48. You guys need to calm down. But that was just something funny that I observed, and also sweet that these men love children so much and were interested in women who would be good moms. I thought that was sweet, and the shock was a little unnecessary. Okay, guys, calm down. So, yeah, I enjoyed my last hurrah at the airport bar in Anchorage. And Alaska was just good to me. And I really think because of all those things I've talked about, because of the gender imbalance, because of the different priorities, looking for someone who is a good fit for you in ways that go beyond the superficial, looking for women who would make good moms and really valuing family, I think is why Alaska is a good pool for women. Now, that being said, were all these men better than men in Nashville? I can't say that. I don't have enough evidence to draw from. I also will say without a shadow of a doubt that these men I was meeting would have been happy if I were willing to have a very casual night with them. I wasn't and didn't, of course, but one of them made it clear that that is what he was interested in. So, are they better? I don't know, but they are more plentiful. And so therefore, I think it is easier to find someone who matches what, as a woman, what you are looking for, even weeding out the ones who are just like every other guy. Because let me tell you, I went on the apps there just to see. The apps were exactly the same as they are in Nashville. The same cliches, the same boring prompts, the same dumb conversations. So I don't know that the quality is higher. I just think the percentages are higher, which makes it easier to find the quality. And maybe because it's a bigger pool in general, the number of quality people is also bigger. That would be my assumption. Again, don't have enough data. Maybe if I go up and waitress next year for a summer, I will have a more conclusive summary of the quality versus quantity. I loved it. I'm so glad I did it. I will say I was dreading coming back to Nashville and finishing these 40 dates. Nothing can compare to this, and nothing can, but now that I've been back in Nashville and starting to see again the benefits and have hope for finding a man here in Tennessee, I am for the tip jar starting a new project. It's both for the tip jar and this podcast of going to bars and trying to meet people in real life. I mean, that's not new. I did that on like day 2 of this podcast, but trying to find the bars where people do that. And I polled my followers and they gave me a lot of really good suggestions. So of course I made a list, and so I'm systematically going through them, starting first with the ones that have multiple recommendations and were recommended by a man. Because if I just go to all the bars where all the girls are, we're not accomplishing anything. So I'm going to start with those and see where we go from there. But I just think there really is something to meeting people in real life, seeing somebody in real life, talking to them, knowing if you have a connection. One of the guy in Homer, if we had met on a dating app, we never would have gone on a date because he is an atrocious texter and speller. He says, I see, literally the letters I see. That stuff drives me crazy. But I met him in real life and I talked to him and we had a good conversation. So I wanted to talk to him more, which is why we went to lunch the next day. So I do think meeting in real life is optimal. This is not news to any of us, but I'm just going to try to find more ways to actually make that happen. So I will report back. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening. This was a fun episode for me to relive and talk about. Next week is the purity culture episode with my friend, Dr. Camden. She is a real life friend of mine, and she is a real life psychologist and expert in purity culture and the damage that it has done to especially millennials. So whether you grew up in the church and you are a product of purity culture, whether you are familiar but luckily did not have to experience it yourself, or you don't know what I'm talking about and you're curious, I hope you will tune in next week. It's a really good conversation. In the meantime, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and give me a follow on Instagram, TikTok, now Facebook. I created a Facebook for the boomers. No, I really created it so I could just get my content out to more people. So all of those are at 40 Dates Podcast. At the number 40 Dates Podcast. Also on YouTube, same at 40 Days Podcast. And thank you again for being here and for listening. And as always, wish me luck.